Hey guys, Chess Coach Andrew Rankin here. Welcome back to another episode with Just Winning with White. Today I want to share a game featuring the Stonewall defense. This is something that I think a lot of players might struggle against. I myself find it super annoying. But I think there's a really good setup that you can play. And I want to show you a game that features just that. So this was a rapid game played on chess.com against a 2000 rated opponent. And I was white, he was black. So the game starts with d4, d5, c4, c6, the Slav defense, knight to f3, which is the main line of the Slav, e6, which is the semi-Slav, and of course when he plays f5, it is now the Stonewall defense. So I played queen to c2. I really like this move. It guards the pawn and it allows me to develop my dark square bishop without having to worry about the c pawn. So he goes bishop to e7. I put my bishop on f4. Now I think my bishop's better than his. And now he plays f5, Stonewall defense, which makes sense because otherwise I think he's just playing a slightly worse position. So I continue with knight to c3. He definitely doesn't want to take here because that defeats the purpose of the Stonewall, so he continues with knight f6. I play the move e3. He castles, and now the bishop goes on d3. It's important that the bishop and the queen and the knight all put as much pressure on e4 as possible so that this pawn and this pawn really have to stay there. And as long as he has this pawn structure, which is the Stonewall pawn structure, then he's always going to have a bad light square bishop. So this is the piece that we're going to play against, and because this piece isn't in the game, the rook can never get in the game. So even though black's going to throw all his pieces at you on the king side, he's playing without 8 points of material, and we're going to try and use that against him. Also, I should note that the bishop is really perfectly placed on the f4 or g3 squares in the Stonewall. And you'll see why here in a minute. So he continues by putting the knight in the center, and then this knight of course is going to reroute to f6. I just castled. He goes bishop to d6, which I like this move because if he's going to put his bishop on e7, then, or I should say if he's going to try and trade off bishops, he should have put his bishop on d6 right away, and there was no reason to put the bishop on e7. If he's going to put the bishop on e7, then it prepares the move g5, and the bishop comes into the game later on via an attack on the king side. So this is already a positional mistake by him, and we actually just ignore it. So we continue with the idea of just trading off some of the queenside pawns, because if he's going to attack over here, we have to find a way to open up the center. And the only way to open up the center is to start to undermine this pawn structure. So he trades off bishops, and we're super happy because now we actually use his weapon against him. So his weapon is this really solid knight and pawn structure holding down the e4 square, but now we get the f4 and d4 pawns that give us the e5 square. And notice our knight can always jump into e5, and he can never play the move f6 to kick our pieces out, but we can play f3 to kick his knight out. So this is just very solid, very good for white. My pawns are on dark squares, and we traded off the dark square bishop. His pawns are on light squares. He traded off the dark square bishop, and he's still stuck with the light square bishop. So this is really not the right strategy. He's playing right into my hands. And notice my attack is still coming, and I don't really see where his attack is, because if he pushes g5, I'll just take it. He has to take with the knight. I'll take back with the knight, and the center opens up, which means the kingside attack is not going to be as good, and his king is going to be very weak. So he just plays the move g6, which makes sense because now this pawn is more solid. For example, after I take, he takes here. This pawn is no longer hanging if the knight were to move. So I played c takes d5. He took towards the center, which makes sense. Opens up this bishop. Notice he's still stuck though. And then I continue with b4, just pushing the pawn and trying to get at this weak c6 pawn. He plays a6. So of course we continue with a4, typical minority attack ideas. He puts the knight on d7, and we played b5. He decides to just play with his knights, so I took towards the center, he takes back, And now I put my knight in the center. Notice now that I have a target, I want to put my knight here. He decides to defend with his bishop, and I drop my knight back to a2. And the computer wanted a move like knight to d1, I guess, to get here to e3, and then not really sure where he's going. You could also go to e2, but I'm not sure where he's going. So the computer was like suggesting a lot of knight reroutes, but I actually think that my knight reroute was really good. It told me that the knight here and the knight here were all mistakes, but it was like as soon as my knight, you'll see, gets really active on his side of the board, all of a sudden the computer's like, yes, brilliant. So I think that the computer really underestimated how active the knight could get once he gets onto the queen side. So my opponent plays queen to e8, which further defends the c-pawn, which I'm putting pressure on with my knight. I play knight to b4, which continues to add pressure to this. He pushes the pawn, but now my knight can jump into a6. And notice the rook can't take because the bishop guards. And the threat is knight to c7 as well as knight to c5, which would double attack the bishop. So he decides to move his queen. That way knight to c7 doesn't create a fork. And now before I jump into d5, I really need to remove this knight so that he doesn't trade off. And we do that with the move f3. So I'm super happy that I still have my f-pawn back on f2, and I can play the move f3. So he has to drop his knight back to d6, and you notice these are just all bad pieces. It's just, this is not a happy setup for black. And now we jump into c5, and we got lots of pressure on this knight. Sorry, on this bishop. Our knights are looking fantastic. This is like what he wanted in his position, but instead white got it in reverse. So this is what I was talking about using the Stonewall players' ideas and tactics against them. So just by trading off this bishop on f4 and taking with the pawn allows us this sweet outpost. c5 is also a great outpost. White, I think, is probably +2 at least here. So he continues with fighting for the open file, and since his rooks are probably the only pieces that can do anything, I decided to simply trade him off. So rook takes rook, he takes back, and then I fight for the open file. And if he gives way to the open file, for example, if he moves away, then I'm just going to infiltrate. Actually, I can't infiltrate there because the knight guards, but I'm probably just going to bring the rook maybe here, and then maybe the queen behind. And eventually we'll find a breaking point. But he decides to take, and now my queen gets to the open file and can infiltrate on the back rank. Again, the problem with the Stonewall is that the king ends up really weak. All you have to do is break through on the queen side or in the center, and the king is usually too weak to survive. So he goes bishop to e8, and I just decide to pin it to the king. The king goes up to g7, and I really like this square because you'll see knight to e6 check is going to be a monster threat here. So I slide my queen over to the corner. Notice that I'm putting pressure on all his weak points. Still have pressure on this weak bishop. And he plays a Louvre move, which is queen to c7. So obviously my threat is that I'm double attacking this pawn. And I'm also double attacking the a5 pawn. And so queen to c7 is the only move that defends both, but it loses to a very simple move. If you guys haven't found the move yet, take some more time. But that move, of course, is knight to e6 check. And he resigned here, but we're forking the queen and the king. And we're going to win the queen on the next move. So this is game over. Let me go back and just go over the moves. So this is the Stonewall. Your pieces all go to normal squares. You get the London bishop on f4. And most importantly is that when he goes to trade off the bishop, you want him to take here so that you can take with the pawn and get the solid outpost on e5. So when he takes, you're actually really happy, and this position is already much better for white. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll catch you later. Bye.